Priyanka, it's all yours.
Thanks, Ryan. I've always wanted to say this, so I'm going to say it. Live from New York City, welcome to the New York Supply Chain Meetup. Thanks, Brian, for putting me on the spot, and now you have that on record. Today, this will be the Eric Johnson show. So, and we have a really informal setup. We're up to 2,900 members now as part of the New York Supply Chain Meetup, and 4,200 as part of the Worldwide Supply Chain Federation. It's a growing community of supply chain professionals who like to talk about what's happening and where the industry is going. And that's what we're going to be doing here, a little bit of crystal ball gazing and, in the prelude to the TPM. So Eric, over to you whenever you're ready.
Great. Thank you, Priyanka. I appreciate it. This is the first time I've been introduced as part of a Saturday Night Live cold open, so I appreciate it. Hello, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Eric Johnson. I'm the technology editor at the Journal of Commerce. I'll take the bait on the free plug, Priyanka. She mentioned our conference TPM is coming up in just a couple weeks, including the TPM Tech event that I chair. That's actually starts 2 weeks from today in person, which should be awesome.
Okay.
But today my task is a fun one. I get to
I won't let her out anymore without.
Oh, can you all go on mute if you're no? Yeah. Is to moderate, but actually it's not really moderating. This is just going to be a fun discussion with 4 different people in the space working for really interesting companies. Not all of them are technology companies, not all of them are software companies, but they all do really interesting things in the world of domestic and global logistics. And we're just going to kind of look ahead right now. We're sort of still at the start of 2022, even though we're like 6 weeks in now. And let's maybe take a step back and think, what are the technologies that most interest us, most excite us? What are conversely the technologies that we think are a bit overrated, passe, or just overvalued for whatever reason? And really kind of hone our idea about what we need to focus on over the next year, especially. There's so much going on. Like, I think I did an informal count on JOC. I think I've written, just since January 1st, I think I've written about 12 different funding rounds.
Did it before.
So it's nuts. And I won't even mention the name of the biggest one, right? Because we don't want to get derailed talking about only that today. So in any case, how this is going to work, I'm going to have our 4 panelists introduce themselves, and then I'm going to open it up with some questions, but we definitely want to hear any questions you may have. So if you have questions, whether it's for a specific panelist or just in general for the whole crew, let us know and we'll get those answered. We'll throw it out and let this be a royal rumble. So with no further ado, let's introduce our panelists. So today joining us are Krinar Kamoni. I butchered your name, Krinar.
That's perfect.
Right?
That's perfect.
Yeah, awesome. Okay. Yeah. CEO of Tife. Ryan Schreiber, VP of Growth and Industry at Metaphora, formerly known as Carrier Direct, and I'll have him explain that name change in a sec. Kai Timmerman, who's COO of Prompt, and Shailesh Gupta, who's Chief of Staff at Portcast. So Krinar, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and Tife?
Awesome. Thank you, Eric. And live from Boston. That's where I am today, from our office here in Boston, Mass. So my name is Krinar. I'm the founder and CEO here at Tife. I started in supply chain logistics 6 years ago, helping my wife's dad track his trucks. And what we do here at Tife is help a lot of customers, shippers, and logistics service providers track their shipments all over the world. What we have these little trackers that customers put on shipment, and they get real-time location anywhere in the globe, independent of truck driver, geography, on where their shipments are, but also their condition. How hot, how cold, how wet did somebody open trailers, containers? We're growing very, very fast. So really excited to be here, and good seeing you, good seeing everyone again.
Cool. Ryan, tell us about yourself and what
Hey,
Metaphora is.
yeah, hey everybody, thanks for having me.
as a recovering attorney, I have to say, I know Eric said this was going to be fun, but fun is not guaranteed. Just want to be clear about that. I'm Ryan Schreiber. As he said, I'm the VP of Growth and Industry. I also think job titles are silly, so don't ask me what that actually means. Our company, Metaphora, is the name is actually Greek for transportation. We're a consulting firm. We do strategy consulting and we do software development, and we focus exclusively on transportation, logistics, and supply chain. So we work with shippers, so manufacturers, retailers, et cetera. We work with transportation providers, brokers, carriers, freight forwarders, railroads. We work with tech companies that serve the same space as us, and we work with financial sponsors like venture firms and private equity firms. I've been in transportation logistics for about a little under 15 years at this point, primarily as an operator, and then I joined our company about 3 years ago. So I have lots. If you guys are Seinfeld fans, Festivus episode, I have lots of problems, and you guys are going to hear about it. So looking forward to kind of sharing my perspective today. Thanks for having me.
Right. It might have been easier for you to list the entities that you don't work with or serve than the ones you
anybody
do.
Outside of transportation, logistics, and supply chain.
Yeah, there you go. Kai, thanks for joining us. You want to tell us about yourself and Prompt?
Absolutely. Thanks, Eric. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me. So CEO over at Prompt. I've been in logistics. It sounds like I'm going to be the old person here. I've been in logistics now for 30 years, starting off on the container shipping side. Last 20 years, leadership roles in 3PLs, running simultaneously ops and IT. So COO, CIO roles jointly, so it kind of gives a different angle on things. As for Prompt itself, we are basically about technology to help logistics providers help make their business work better, which is basically making their application toolkit, making that better itself, and focusing basically on the availability, the breadth, the accuracy of information to our customers, so logistic providers and their customers, and we're really focusing on trying to put that and deliver that in the best possible context. So our current products basically address domains like document intake, payables processing, decision support, customer integrations, with more on the way.
Cool. Glad you could join us, Kai. Looking forward to digging into your thoughts on some things. Shailesh, you want to tell us a little about yourself and Portcast?
Yeah, definitely. Hi, everyone. This is Shailesh here from Podcast. First of all, thanks so much for joining. So Podcast is a firm based out of Singapore, and it's into shipping visibility, container visibility. So what we do is help freight forwarders and shippers get a clear understanding of when their containers or their cargo is going to hit certain milestones. We do that leveraging machine learning algorithms that we've developed in-house. What this does is that those guys can plan their supply chain, their downstream supply chains much better. In addition, we help companies deal with exception management, lots of entropy in the world, various things that can go wrong. We try to tell the customers what's happening in a timely manner so that they can do something about it. Also moving into providing analytics services to our clients, which can enable them to do an N number of things, including booking a little bit better or knowing where their shipping contracts need to go. So yeah, that's broadly what we do. Glad to be here.
Cool. Well, so let me get started. And I think before we can kind of talk about the things that get us excited, I want to hear from each of you what, if you had to say the single biggest problem that your customer base or client base deals with today. I know there's more than one, but I want the one that like jumps to your head before everything else. I want to hear what that is. And maybe we'll go in reverse order. Shailesh, you can start this one off.
All right, I get to
Put you
start
on the spot
here.
here.
No, that's good. I think the single biggest issue that clients are facing right now is the delays that they're observing. At least that's the issue that they're telling us. A majority of that issue is due to congestion on some of the major ports. So what's happening is that the sales team of our clients is promising something to their customers. Cargo arrives at a very different date, and the sales promises all go to waste. So that's the biggest problem statement for us.
Interesting. Kai,
Yeah.
how about your customers?
Information visibility. So it's For them, it's what's actually happening where. I mean, obviously, all the supply chains that we're talking about are highly distributed, very much in the international supply chain side. So clarity in terms of what's happening where, and bringing it together to a person in a unified, simple way. But it's information visibility in short.
Okay, interesting. I have a follow-up question for you after to come back to. Maybe we can start with this about that issue. So, but Ryan, what's your?
My answer is somewhat similar, but a little different. Actually, I wrote an article for JOC a few months ago, looking at the beginning of this year, kind of looking ahead. My answer is actually tech stacks that enable data connectivity. Like, let's look at the other panelists who aren't me here. They're all data companies at their heart, right? And it's all about connecting the data elements and getting the data elements out, getting them where they need to be. So really, it's tech stacks that enable data connectivity. We all know.
I'm doing all right.
I'm glad to hear that. I'm really glad to hear that. Where are you at? But she went on mute now, I think. Okay, great. Anyway, so right. So we all know that like a lot of tech stacks are kind of trying to marry this new age technology that's built in these system architecture, service architecture, et cetera, right? Where data is at the center into these analog, antiquated monoliths. So really the key is data tech connectivity in these tech stacks.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Cool. Bernard?
So I would boil it down to, if you said one thing, so I got to say one thing. As we know, right, there's all the panels here, we're talking about data, and there's a lot of data that's being married together, trying to tell customers visibility on what's happening with the shipment. But I think I had to boil it down to why customers use us and what's the biggest headache is trust in data.
Okay.
So now you want to know where the servers are. You want to know whether that reefer has 40 degrees temperature, 40 degrees Fahrenheit. You want to be able to say with 99.9 certainty that that's what's really happening.
Okay, so let's pick up on this because Kai, when you said data visibility, it made me immediately think, and I'm not disagreeing with you, but I wanted to sort of provide a point of reference.
Got it.
It immediately made me think of, there was a panel that the Federal Maritime Commission convened a couple weeks ago that had 6 of the biggest U.S. importers and exporters on it. And basically they were picking their brain on what data elements they sort of needed to run their supply chains from a ocean and port into connecting with the inland to warehouse kind of, and then obviously the reverse flow for exports. And universally, they all sort of had the same thing, which is they said the data is there, right? They have access to it. The problem is they don't know the quality of it, and it comes in a time frame that doesn't match up with what they need. So that's sort of touching on, I think, a bunch of things that you've individually said, right? Which is trust, like Kranar said, the lack of the latency of the data or the inaccuracy of the data doesn't allow them to then commit to things that they need to with their customers. Kai, I wanted to get your thoughts. Had you seen that discussion, and what are sort of your thoughts about that visibility or access versus can I trust in the data?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I did see that, and it's interesting because it comes down to, I guess you can look at the information window from a lot of different angles. I guess I tend to look at it from the user perspective, right? Yeah. So I'm looking at it, I'm opening up my screen and whatnot. So I wouldn't disagree with what Michael and what the other folks had actually said at that presentation, right? I think it is about, again, I think you can, how to say this, I agree that there is certain information that's certainly outdated. And it gets outdated, but there's also the ability to grab those pieces and actually pull it together through a window that somebody can go see, right? Because I think part of it is for me to go figure this out, I've got to go over there, and I've got to go over there, and I've got to go over there, and I've got to go open up this portal and go figure those things out. And I think it goes what Ryan's talking to you about, the tech stack question, about how do you pull those pieces together in such a way that I don't need to do those things. Because again, I think there's a plethora of technologies, a plethora of availability is almost too much. But the question is, how do I get it to a point that's usable, that is, it's been vetted to whatever extent it can, and is in a way that I don't need to go jumping through 25 different hoops to pull it together.
Yeah, I think your point about there almost being too much is a great one, Kai, right? Like I call what you just described, I call UI proliferation.
Mhm.
The problem that we're facing really from a data perspective in a lot of respects, and kind of why I start with data connectivity is, up until maybe 5 or 6, 7 years ago, the issue was getting data. I just need more data. Let's get more data, whatever.
Yep.
And since we didn't have as much data, we could dump it on a user and say, okay, Mr. User, Miss User, figure it out.
Mhm.
Take these, synthesize the data points and figure out what's happening or figure out what we need to do. Now we're at a place where that's too much. And right, like there's too many
Mhm.
salient data points for an individual to figure out. So now we have to, when we dump it on a user, what does a user do? They basically just wing it. They go back to like the default setting of make it up. So the data is it's too much.
Mhm.
And so if there's all of these, and there's myriad problems with that, UI proliferation is certainly one of them. They're not going to go to all of the different systems.
Okay.
They're going to go to the one that they trust the most, or the two that they trust the most, or that gives them enough information. They're going to draw incomplete conclusions, often like totally incorrect conclusions,
Mhm.
and they're going to move on. So I think everything that you just talked about, really, honestly, in many ways, has forced us to move backwards as an industry from that perspective, because we're asking too much of the users. We're not doing what we call, so that's a big trend we're also tracking. Eric, you said there's a lot. We call that assistance with decisioning, presenting users with decisions to verify, not problems
Right.
to solve, so that they're able to actually be more effective. Shalish, that also touches on kind of what you were talking about, those insights so they can act on them, et cetera. So I totally agree with everything you said.
I actually think that given the option, the user isn't even considering the quality of the data. It's more like what workflow are they used to, what represents the least change to what they're used to. Because if it's an incremental change, and it means if it's an incremental improvement, but they have to change everything about the way they do it, they're not going to do it, right? If it's
it's
huge change and they know for a fact it's going to be much better, that's a different motivation. But
they're going to do enough to not get hassled, right? A lot of people have probably seen Office Space, right? Like my only motivation is to not get hassled,
right.
and that's ultimately right. That's ultimately what they're going to default to.
Yep.
It's just human nature. It's incentivization.
Yep. Yeah, interesting. Well, so the data thing is really at the heart, obviously, of technology that's out there, whether you're talking about, predictive analytics, all AI, ML, all the buzzwords, right? Like if the data is not good that's going into those models, you're going to get bad results, right? So let's maybe shift gears and kind of look into the future a bit and try to hone in on some of the things that you're most excited about. It could be preferably if it's something that's, it might be verging into your business, but it's not like a necessarily only about your business, but just something big picture that you think is really transformative. That's not going to be 10 years out, but is like actually happening right now. And feel free to talk about the impact that it has on your business, good or bad, but I assume good. But let's maybe broaden this out to like, what is the biggest, because I mean, this is honestly a question I get asked a lot, right? Like, what do I need to be focusing on this year? Everything, but no, obviously you can't do that, right? You need to be thinking about one or two things. So Kunar, maybe you want to go first on this one?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I because I'm so involved on my day-to-day work around Tife, I think about always what the future is going to bring for our company and how it's going to impact the industry. So maybe I'll answer it a little bit like that. But what excites me the most, that it's coming in the future, right, is just the overall tech. If you think of 10 years ago or 15 years ago, where we were with cell phones and SIM cards, like just the overall Internet of Things, we had to pay hundreds of dollars for, first of all, the hardware, then pay $10, $20, $30 for a SIM card a month to be able to get some little bit of data. That world has changed, and it's continuing to change in a positive direction, right? So chipsets are becoming more inexpensive. They're squeezing more sensors into these chips with so you can put accelerometers, you can put temperature sensors, humidity sensors. Radios are becoming, like, just the wireless connectivity of things is becoming more power efficient overall. And as that trend keeps going down, what happens is we suddenly can make hardware that it's more cost effective. They can do all these interesting things and actually go on shipments. And I'm really excited about not in 2022, right? But 2023, 24, 25, where things become even thinner, smaller, batteries become more efficient, power consumption on the chips becomes better, and cost of these starts to get into single digits, and you get to start, like, it becomes a no-brainer after that to put trackers or something that measures in real-time location of shipments, because then the data is much more accurate. And one thing you said, Ryan, is so true. Like, people are simple. They don't want to overthink. What's the simplest way to get something? You just slap a tracker or label or something on a shipment, and suddenly you know exactly where it is. There's no debate about it. However, the cost needs to go down. So that's one thing the reason why I started the company, and the reason why I'm excited about every single day where we're going and just overall in the tech side. So that's what I think about a lot. And that's what it's going to change the industry, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, Ryan, to your point, Ryan, before we jumped on live, was showing us how he could turn his car alarm on Chicago in his car sitting in Texas, right, from his phone. So, I mean, to your point, like, imagine that sort of, application capability in our industry, right? Using devices and connected devices. So, one point before we move on from you, Kanar, is I think there's some divergence. You take the super optimistic kind of potential unlimited approach to hardware in the physical world of logistics, in terms of potentially the costs come down in such a way that every shipment is in play, right? Like down to a product level, down to a small product level. I think some people aren't thinking that, expansively, right? Some people are sort of still in the mindset that there's certain categories of goods or certain types of assets that need to be tracked and others definitely don't. So I think that's one of the things that I'm going to be watching in terms of the thing that excites you, is like how close you are to being correct versus some of the people who are a little more, I would say, conservative about their opinion on that. So, and these are people in your market, not necessarily skeptics of the hardware, right? So,
yeah, I think the thing is, maybe we're not looking at the derivatives of what happens, right? We're looking at one point, which is visibility on what that data. But what can we do with that data? The amount of efficiencies we can create, the operating leverage we can increase with so many mundane tasks that humans do today in supply chain logistics, where we have to hire so many people and charge hundreds of dollars extra per load to guarantee a delivery, like all those things. Then once you have data like this, it becomes just a no-brainer to, even if it's a single digit, to put these things in. So I think, Ryan, you were pointing, yes.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just agreeing with you, because ultimately it's a cost delta, right? I mean, I think, Eric, it's a question of creativity. In a manner, it's a question of creativity of these folks, and that's the point about the derivative outcomes of it, but also like the creativity of not being able to think ahead to a future where it is closer to zero. I mean, right? I mean, where these things do cost pennies per and not dollars per to really accomplish, right? And then it becomes I don't want to track lumber today, right? If I have a lumber shipment, I don't want to track it to the piece, because who cares? It's way too expensive.
Also, if it's 20, 30, 40, 50 miles away, it doesn't really,
yeah, exactly. But even if it's going globally, like, it's kind of good enough to know where the container is, and like it's kind of good enough to generally know what product's on there. But when we can understand kind of that unit economics piece and be more creative around what that enables, like, I think that ultimately, Kanar, to your point, is what unlocks all of that. I'm just going to insinuate myself and answer the question of what I'm most excited about, which I think touches on all of this, right? Which is flexibility. And Salish talked about this earlier, and I'm sorry if I just butchered your name, my friend, but the future is flexible, is what everybody hears me say constantly. The future is flexible, the future is flexible, the future is flexible. And all of the things that these folks are working on is unlocking a more flexible future, right? And so that is redistributing product across the world if you have a shutdown because of a pandemic or because of global instability, geopolitical instability, or because of a Suez Canal issue, or whatever it might be. Or something as simple as, Shalish, this was what you were talking about, your product gets stuck somewhere and you've got to reship like your package gets stuck somewhere, you got to reship the package. Or this container is stuck somewhere, we've got to now air freight something. And being able to on the fly and almost automatically make a lot of those changes. Flexible you've seen investments across the supply chain in this over the last few years. Flexible warehousing with people like Stored and Flex, right? Companies like what you guys, some of what you guys have, companies like Convey, which got bought by Project 44, are all companies that are working on this thesis or problem of flexibility. That's going to become even more important as we continue to move through this pandemic and hopefully eventually have a post-pandemic world, because manufacturers, shippers globally are looking to differently source their products to de-risk the origin of their products and also de-risk their trade lanes. Domestically within the US, that means constant change. The steady state is a long way off from what we've been used to from a supply chain balance standpoint. That's going to continue this thrash. So that's what I'm really tracking to. We're already seeing early futures flexible things, but I think that's just going to continue to escalate. And you guys everybody on this call is certainly working on parts of enabling that.
I don't know if flexibility is a technology, but I will allow it because it was a good answer, Ryan. So I'll let you skate on that one, but I may have to come back and actually get something more concrete than flexibility is like a gymnastics term. Come on, Kai. No, but it's a great thought. Kai.
Sure. I'm going to just jump briefly and actually on the I'll call it supply chain dispersion as opposed to flexibility. And what I mean by that is actually taking, so from a technology perspective, being able to deliver, I think, number of functions. Again, if I'm sort of building a bit on Ryan's point, but what used to happen, so dispersion is the business event. The capabilities around that wind up being, what companies are going to need in that world. So in the sense of they're now going to have to, so if you're a logistics service provider in a dispersed world, now you got to deal with environments you haven't had to deal with before. So we talked about information visibility, that much more important to pull all this stuff together. Being able to do what we call warehouse retail compliance exercises in places you hadn't traditionally done it before. Those sorts of things fit in the bill. Is it the most important, exciting technology? But I think it's hugely important in terms of, if I look at dispersion this way, I think it's hugely important. What I tend to push for is sort of two views. Let's call it home runs, and then let's call the people the catch-ups. The home runs, you've got, I think, with large players like the Walmarts, the Amazons, and the Maersks, there are some really big potential hits in terms of, from a robotics perspective, or some of the real big bets going on. Exactly where they're going to go, I don't quite know yet. But I think, again, watching what they're doing at a home run perspective, I think is going to be interesting, because there are spaces in there, really big labor pulls, really big things that a lot of smaller folks can't do by themselves. So you could talk about, again, it's whether it be, let's call it the big blockchain or identification pushes. They're the people who have the ability to create the gravity to make some of those things happen. That otherwise folks, I wouldn't say the underlings, but the folks in singles and doubles may not be able to do. So if you got that side of the equation, you have the big fish playing the home runs, the technology that's going to, I'll call the smaller players, that will help them get to, I think, to catch up to those bigger folks. And so that becomes the more bite-sized technologies that enable those things to happen. So again, it's a lot of the data stuff everybody's already talked to, so I can't really re-say those things again. But those pieces are, again, if I see the world, I see supply chain dispersion, which leads to a set of technologies. I see the big fish, the things like the blockchain, the identities, the robotics. There's a lot of big things that meat-wise that happen out there, and I think the ability to pull through. And then you've got all these other pieces coming out that, and how those assemble to make the smaller folks more effective. As another spot I'm watching closely.
Yeah, I think that last piece is something I write about a lot, if I'm understanding you correctly. I mean, it's been called the democratization, right, of software, right? That's huge, right? Because I think in any industry, we tend to get really enamored and preoccupied with big names, right? Like you just said, Amazon, Walmart, Maersk, right? Those are the first three names that came out of your head for their various industries, right? But the fact is, for every one of those, there's 1,000 software companies
100%.
that are out there going, I want to build something for everybody else to compete with those guys or those companies, right? So, and maybe that thought process has been around for a long time, but the ability to spin something up on the software side, it's not easy what Krenar is doing at all to do this in a short period of time, but on the software side has never been easier, right? So that to me is absolutely a hugely important trend.
80% of the functionality, 10%, 20% of the cost, right? That sort of thing is that, and that's the big benefit. And so, but again, is that a specific technology? That's, so I couldn't use that to answer your question.
True.
But there's a lot of things in that space, and that whole 80 for 10 is a big nut, and that again we're paying attention to. So it's a little bit selfish of me saying that, but I think that's a big opportunity.
Well, the things that make that possible, if I can, are obviously the cloud infrastructure, the flexibility, to go back to you, Ryan, about scaling up and down your development needs, even engineering needs, and I forgot the second one that was brilliant that just jumped out of my head. The integration, right? Like there's now, especially in logistics, there are integration specialists that you don't have to explain why a customs broker needs to connect with needs to be connected to this party, or why a freight broker needs to be connected to these three entities. They're domain specialists, and they just jump in straight away and tell you where you need to be prioritizing your integration resources, right? So those two things I think are huge. Those are the technology underpinnings for that democratization. Shailesh, what's got
something similar, like with regards to an industry trend, it's definitely like the industry is more open to sharing data. So if I just think back a few years, I'm working in frontline manufacturing, and like I need to tell my technicians what to build next week. Our material is coming from Louisiana into Texas, so it's not far away, but we just don't know. We don't know where it is. We don't know what's happening. We're emailing the suppliers. But over time, I think what the industry has realized is that in connecting different pieces of data, there's a lot of value to be unlocked. So for example, when we are talking to some of our competitors, people are surprised that these guys are providing visibility, you are providing visibility, like how are you talking, how are you collaborating? But the thing is that you have one visibility point, we have another point. The philosophy of let's just collaborate, and then together we can create something which unlocks more value, which we could previously not even foresee, right? So the industry managers understanding this, so I think that is something that I'm excited about. I think that's happening. On that, I think like getting data is one, but then when you start collaborating, you also notice that a lot of data is conflicting in nature. Now, if you need to resolve those conflicts at scale, it is very hard for just humans to do it. I mean, humans typically are good at resolving conflicts, but to do it at scale, you need the technology infrastructure, like smart technology, which is where some machine learning also comes into play. Which can enable, with minimum human involvement, resolving some of those conflicts. And like one of the easy example is like which of the carriers is providing the best schedules, right? Like we don't know, it's a hit or a miss, but how do you get the right one at scale? That is the technological improvement that gets me excited.
Yeah, interesting. But yeah, the data sharing piece is great, and that's good to hear, because frankly, everyone overrates the value of their own individual data, right? They all think that it's like, because and fair to them, they've read 15 economist articles over the last decade that says data is the new oil, right? So, I don't want to give everyone my oil, right? So, but to your point, it's totally a 1 + 1 = 3 situation, if not more in most cases, right? So it's good to hear that people are realizing that, even competitors, right? So
yeah, exactly. I would say I can't agree with more than that. Like if I had to use another word right on top of flexibility, is collaboration. there is nothing that I'm more excited about other than the text that stuff that I talked about more concretely is the collaboration piece that's happening in the industry. Like like we collaborate with all the players, right? P44, Forecast, Transvoyant, everybody out there to be able to help the customer get the data that they need as fast as possible.
Yep.
And that's going to happen more and more.
Yep.
Exactly. Like when we are doing our strategy pieces and trying to map out who our competitors are, almost all our competitors are also potential clients. So that was unique to the industry, and I think that's an exciting trend. Yeah.
So I see this. I personally see this a lot more in terms of vendors cooperating or partnering with one another. Are we yet at a point? And maybe Ryan, I'll ask you for kind of more the domestic view of this, and maybe the others a little bit more on the international side. Are we yet at the point where shippers are en masse ready to start like commingling, data to optimize, jointly, whether it's procurement, whether it's, having the bill on visibility, that sort of thing?
We're maybe not quite like that far, but I think what we're like, where we are is 3 years ago, probably as recently as 3 years ago, to your point, they were reading all these economist articles, data is the new oil. So data is data is data is data. And I have to protect all of it. And where we are definitely is maybe some of this I have to protect, but some of it is much more valuable when commingled with others. And so that's really where we are in the journey, is the openness to think differently about which data they need to predict or protect. But certainly, like, shippers are a slow moving community in that journey. Transportation providers are much quicker. So we are seeing more of that on the transportation side, right? I mean, and that's not necessarily new. When Transplay started 22 years ago, they started as a marketplace.
Right.
They started of, those 5 or whatever it is, 6 large carriers to commingle their contract lanes and be able to like drive efficiencies within their networks. And so it's not necessarily new, but we are seeing that speed up. We are seeing that be faster. And so I don't know that we need shippers to get there necessarily, right? If the broader transportation and logistics community is moving that fast or moving faster and continuing to increase velocity, which we are seeing, the shippers are going to get the tangential benefits of that anyway.
Without having to like commit to that, right? It's sort of behind a
exactly. And that's from a tech perspective, what we're seeing, right? We're seeing the movements in that space, the things that enable that, right? So that's where data connectivity comes in. That's where some of these platforms come in to create environments where that's possible for all of us to do that. Freight waves, I know maybe it's a bad word to say on here, freight waves, with some of their, it's just a joke. That was for everyone else at home, just a little inside joke between me and EJ. But that's what they're building with Sonar, Track specifically, their new pricing platform. There are other pricing platforms that operate on sort of similar context. So there's certainly like those things that are coming, but that's where we are really, right? We're at that place where they're thinking differently about it.
Yeah, and I mean, even at the broker level, right? Convoy just came out with a tool that helps them, expands their pool of capacity to what are ostensibly the competitive brokers, right? So
yeah, capacity as a service, absolutely. Like right, more and more stuff like that of how do I think about my business differently for co-opetition, and co-opetition is probably the word of the day.
Right.
Yeah, especially at the moment. If capacity in general across the board is tight, if nothing else, all that does is exacerbate that conversation, right? It'll push people that direction. And again, what happens as capacity opens up? Do people, exactly how does that work at that stage? The mechanics may be a little bit different. But at the moment, again, this is where kind of recognizing the economic moment and the stress moment on supply chain, and that's driving certain behaviors. But certainly, again, anybody's going to do anything to basically get their hands on capacity at the moment. So.
Well, and Kai, in your world, serving forwarders, and Shailesh, you have a niche with forwarders as well. But right now, there's not a single forwarder that I spoke to in the last year who didn't have the exact same experience of, I have more inbound requests for capacity than I've ever had in my entire history. And I have zero ability to serve any of those like inbound leads that I would have been dying for in any other market, right?
Yeah.
So what you just said is made me think, like, if there was a way for forwarders to work together, and I know there's networks, there's forwarding networks, and there's agency, kind of partnerships, but like, what if there was a way to say, hey, I know a forwarder who's got the capacity to serve that right now, and there's that builds that sort of like ability to
organize. Who I think, sorry to interrupt, but you had there's a couple of articles recently where folks have gone out in short-term charters, right? Basically on spot charters, and there's an opportunity there to go aggregate forwarders and to work outside the carrier community, right? So again, I think this goes a little bit back to almost my funding comment, talking about there's an opportunity there, certainly from a capacity perspective, to leverage some of that and to figure, but that's, again, trying to get the forwarder group to get that together and say, okay, then who's going to drive the funding to support it? You can see an architecture, but it's not going to come together that quickly. It doesn't seem like it, but there's possibilities there. Especially if, Maersk's point, what, their 70% contract? Was that the last thing I saw? And, again, I'm sure the other carriers will start to, that will play out. Again, these are the things that, from a time horizon, if I start looking at, I think the capacity thing will play out. The question is, how long does the supply chain sort of, if you will, stoppage, how long does that go? And the longer that goes on, the more I think there may be some of these other things that pop up. So, a potentially forward driven, I'm sure somebody will figure out the capitalization problem, because there's enough capital in the world, so that's not a problem. Just to figure out how to set up the funding model to make it work.
Yep.
But to your point though, what we have found is there are forwarders who have, again, on the capacity side, they have already pre-purchased capacity, whether it be fixed charter planes out of certain areas, et cetera. And so again, the thrust has been, I need that fixed capacity in that area. And it's just been short.
Yeah. So. A question came in. I think, Ryan, you may have tried to take a crack at it. A question came in from someone in the audience about whether data is the new supply chain infrastructure. Is that the right way to think of data? I have to think about that. I don't know if I necessarily subscribe to that, but any thoughts? I feel like infrastructure is the new supply chain infrastructure, but no, sorry, I'm just joking.
I think I think it actually is part of the new supply chain infrastructure. I've been talking a lot about kind of like infrastructure, thinking of meaning a lot of things. Like, I'll use a simpler analogy of like, a lot of this Silicon Valley. I live in Austin, Texas, right? And we see all of these people come in Austin and whatever, and there's also all these people going to Miami, and it's like flight from Silicon Valley. And there's a juxtaposition of like Austin from like, let's just take Austin and Miami here, right? Because Austin has all of the infrastructure to be like a new Silicon Valley, whereas like Miami and some of these other places have to build that. And infrastructure in that capacity means, it means VCs, it means engineering talent, it means like office space, it means a lot of these other things than just, how we traditionally have thought about infrastructure. So I definitely think that data is a part of the new supply chain infrastructure, but definitely infrastructure, I think, is the primary new supply chain infrastructure. And it's because of the shifting demands of the supply chain, right? I mean, all of these boats are anchored off the port of Long Beach because they can't go anywhere else. I mean, if they move up the coast and go to move up the coast to go to the East Bay or to go to SeaTac, where are they going to go? Like, I mean, how are we going to get them off the boat? How are we going to get it off the container? How are they going to make inland delivery, et cetera? Same, Port of Savannah is feeling that big time as well these days. So that infrastructure development, because of this shifting supply chain at the port level, is actually probably the most important supply chain infrastructure problem that we're facing right now, in my opinion.
Shailesh, did you have a thought?
Yeah, I have something on that. I've been thinking about that too, right? So, I mean, as the demand scales up, yes, the infrastructure has to scale up, but it will not be proportional, right? A lot of that augmentation of infrastructure is going to come from efficiency improvements that are provided by technology. So, like a simple and like analogy to it is like 500 years back, the world population was 500 million or something. Today it's 8 billion or probably more. So it's not as if the agriculture land has increased in that same proportion, right? Like we would have cut all the forests in the world if that was the case. We've improved the productivity of per unit land by a lot. And similarly, like we need to improve the ability of, let's say, ports to process containers much more faster. So I think yes, infrastructure is the infrastructure, but the majority of that efficiency gain, I peg it on technology and being more efficient using that. So
there's also asymmetries between, technology can help to a certain degree, but when a port on one end, or if we say even a domestic destination, if one warehouse is insanely efficient and just churning turn times in 20 minutes, and the other end is 4 hours or a day and a half, that doesn't work. Same with the ports, right? We saw early on in the port crisis last year, around March, Asia was humming, but the US was not, because there was asymmetries between how many hours they worked, right? And that started to slowly build up until the end of the year. It became what it became. So technology has to be put in play, but it also has to be put in play in sort of a harmonious way, even for different buyers and users, right? So
yeah. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Kai.
Go ahead, Shailesh. Go ahead.
No, yeah, I was saying, yeah, it makes sense in the sense that you can't accelerate one part of the supply chain when the bottleneck is somewhere else. And I think that brings us back to collaboration, right? Like, so don't speed up a part that doesn't need to be sped up before you've taken care of the bottleneck. So I think if that visibility is there in the entire supply chain loop, it could be more harmonious. That's back to interconnectivity.
Yep. Well, let's shift gears a little bit and look out into the future. You guys are all, well, I'm anointing you all professional futurists now. So how do you feel about that? I have two questions future-wise. One is technology related, one is market related. Okay, in your view, and maybe let's do the harder one first. In your view, when do things, I hate this word, but normalize, stop being so nutty, let's put it that way. And then second question would be, what technology that right now is like not even on people's radar is going to be seen as, if not integral, at least interesting to our market, say in the next 5 years? So let's do the market one first. When do things stop being so nutty?
I can jump in quickly here.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I want to go with a little bit of a normalize. I don't think there's going to ever be a normalization. I think we know that. But when do things get a little bit more normal than what they are today? I think it's going to be end of this year, early next year. And I'm looking at it more from the chip side of things. So if you think of a chip shortage and what happened with Ford and GM and all these cars you couldn't manufacture because of the chip shortage, I thought that from what I'm seeing in the semiconductor and all the factories that are being built and like ramp up time and manufacturing that's happening on that side, normalization is starting to happen in November, December, early next year. And as that happens, I think a lot of other, it'll have good cascading effects on the other parts of the supply chain. So that's what I would say based on that one data point.
That's the canary in the coal mine.
Yeah.
Cool. Interesting. Kai?
I'll say some point, probably, I'm in 2023. I'm still thinking it's probably a little bit later in 2023, but I will say 2023, about mid-ish year. Again, I'm thinking there's going to probably be some level of adverse demand cycle in the US. I think people have got to get a sense about what that's going to look like for inflation, because everybody's right now reporting inflation's a sort of 6-7% number, if not more.
I think 7.5 I saw today. So.
Yeah, so I didn't see the most recent one. And the challenge will wind up being, I think, that will wind up having an impact on demand. But I think by the time things start to play themselves out, I think we'll be certainly, I think, earliest middle of next year.
Let's pray that there's no COVID anymore. Like, let's just make sure there's nothing like that.
Well, but to your point, Kai, 7.5% and no U.S. stimulus could curtail demand in a pretty quick fashion. So then it's a matter of like, how long does it take to unravel everything that's kind of gone on the last year and a half?
Yeah, agreed.
What are you seeing?
Yeah, I mean, I think based on what I'm reading, based on what analysts are projecting, end of 2022, early 2023, as Craner and Kai just mentioned. So that's what I'm thinking. The forces would probably be demand would stabilize a little bit as people. It's been said that people are not spending on experiences; they're spending on goods. They're at home, hence demand shot up. They had those stimulus checks coming in. All those effects are going to normalize a little bit. There's going to be improvement in terms of the capacity as well. So I think all that will play a part. In addition, I think like some companies will just like move to near shoring and overall movement will reduce, especially for some companies that would make more sense. And then we'll have an equilibrium end of year, hopefully.
Okay, Ryan.
So I guess I'm going to be I don't know, is it the bear or the bull in this context? I think it's much longer. Like, I mean, even to the extent that we see a demand slowdown from a consumer spending, and like to your point around the stimulus money, Eric, like we're losing sight of the spending on infrastructure. Like, right, we have the infrastructure bill. That's going to take a ton of freaking transportation resources, right? Like and so if we don't have consumer spending slow down, which like, there are a lot of people that are much smarter than me on that front. So like, I don't know, but if we don't have it, it's going to be a real bloodbath. But if we do, still, there's this spending on infrastructure that's coming that's going to take a lot of transportation resources. And from a more global perspective, the longer that we have these supply chain disruptions, COVID or not, the more the impetus comes to shift the global supply chain to different regions, right? And Eric, you, me, and Bruce Chan from Stifel were talking about this recently, right? The more that there's this shift, again, that's going to leave us without a steady state domestically. That's going to leave us without a steady state globally for many years, because you can't just pick up from China and move to Vietnam. The infrastructure is not there. You can't just pick up, and infrastructure means, ports. It means roads to be able to even build the manufacturing facility to then use the roads to go back to the ports. So, it's going to be, in my opinion, a long time before we have a steady state globally like we've been used to for the last 10 or 15 years.
I also think one thing that we don't know, and is pretty unknowable at this point, is like what long-term impacts are there on the way that we live from these past years. Like maybe there's not that many. Maybe we just decide we want to go back to the way we live. But if a bunch more people start working from home, there's public transportation and private transportation impacts. There's all the restaurants that we used to go to in downtowns that we don't go to anymore. There's all the little goods and purchases and economic activity that's associated with that if we're just at home more often, right?
But you're not unringing the e-com bell, Eric. Like all of that stuff, sure, but those are incremental differences.
No, I didn't get less or more. I just meant different, right?
No,
like,
I know.
So yeah, and we're seeing, like, the question is, you're right. The question is.
But I think what has staying power, all I'm suggesting is what definitely has staying power is the e-com boom.
Yeah, for sure.
All of that other stuff is an incremental difference, but you're not unringing the e-com bell because, right, who's really been the biggest like driver of the e-com shift? It's been older folks, right? It's been older folks who used to only pay, only go to the grocery store. My grandmother-in-law, if that's a term, my grandmother-in-law is a perfect example of this. She's like 90 something years old, old woman, lives in Texas. She'd still go to the grocery store by herself. Now she won't. And she's not gonna start doing that again after the pandemic because she's been exposed to that lifestyle change. Certainly there's a social element to it. She has that other places. So you're not going to unring the e-com bell. So that definitely has staying power. And I think to your point about going to the store, going out to eat and the movies and that stuff, that's incremental as compared to the e-com growth, in my opinion.
That's fair. So let's go with our remaining time. Let's go around the horn. What's the one tech flying ships, autonomous planes, drones, EV, whatever. By the way, these are all things I don't spend a whole lot of time thinking about, honestly, because I'm too much in the real world right now. But what's going to be like way more ubiquitous in 5 years than it is right now?
Can we push off? If we push off a little bit more than 5 years, because I know it's not 5 years.
Let's go 10.
Okay, I'm going to say additive manufacturing and 3D manufacturing. I'm going to go that direction. And again, because obviously, I mean, certain industries are using it very well. We don't need to talk about that because it's currently being out there in whether it be in aeronautics, whether it be in the medical devices side, et cetera. But if you start to play and think that out, again, this goes back a little bit to what Kanar was saying about technology. Let's extrapolate it on technology, right? If you take 3D tech manufacturing and you start pushing that out and gets actually reasonable in 10 years, your whole conversation around supply chain starts to really go on its head. You think about, manufacturing as a service. So again, it doesn't necessarily need to be, I have it at the local supermarket, but it could be something closer to where I'm at. That's something that, again, I've got a little bit of a geek in me back from the old days. And I think there's some real interesting shaping that can happen if you're talking about fundamental disruption in that kind of world. Sorry, there's more than 5 years that I know that. So
no, it's all good. That's interesting. I mean, we may see some of this stuff within 5 years. It may not be like everywhere, but a lot more of it than we do now. And I agree. That's a big one.
Yeah, you think about sustainability and what people, they want things to travel around the world a little bit less. And you think about, what you can do with the CAD. And if people can figure out the technology of a woven sneaker, so to speak, or whatever, it starts to get interesting. So.
Yep. Who else wants to jump in?
Yeah, I can go. So, yeah, go ahead, Eric. You're saying
I was just going to say, I'm going to be marking this down and I'm going to be coming back in 5 years to see how now. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it would be green hydrogen powering ships. So I see a lot of investment going around in green hydrogen. These are long-term projects. Oil and gas companies in the Middle East, they're very seriously thinking about this, about more and more investments into this space. Marketplaces and certification mechanisms are coming to define like what is green hydrogen, what is blue hydrogen, what is other hydrogen. It started to be using in the shipping industry. Shipping is emitting like 3% of the global greenhouse gases. I think with this, from an emissions point of view, it could be a revolution. And I mean, globalization has been commonly blamed for a large amount of these greenhouse emissions because you're buying things from different places. But if you can make shipping green, then in a way, you're making globalization green as well. So like that is one technology thing that I think will revolutionize this industry.
Interesting. Yep. Kunar?
I'm gonna say two because they're completely different. One, I think it's just quick. It's on ports. I believe more ports are gonna get automated. There's I've seen a couple of this here in the United States. There's a lot, of course, in Asia. But as we create more of these automation around ports, things are getting that's the bottleneck right now, and things could get much better. So let's automate as much as we can on the ports. And the second one is, I think you mentioned inflation, and if you look at the financial future of the world, I'm a big believer in crypto. And I believe that that's going to enable efficiencies even in supply chain as payments get made between parties, because then there's trust going to be involved and handing over from point A to point B to C and making payments to carriers, shipping lines, all of that, customs, standardizing customs. The layer that's going to kind of make that happen is crypto. And 5 to 10 years is going to play a big role, I believe, in supply chain, making it more efficient too.
Well, let's hope it's Dogecoin, because that'd be great for me. I think that
some kind of doesn't matter if it's fiat, right? Just the technology around it.
No, I get it. Yeah, Dogecoin. I agree. Everyone on this call should go buy Dogecoin right now. Doge to the moon. Absolutely, totally agree with you.
Don't do that. That's my advice.
or do it. Like make your own life choices. So. No judgment. Listen, this is a judgment-free zone. Who am I to tell you guys how to live your lives? But go buy Doge. Anyway, I think that, look, I'm super bullish on automation. I've been bullish on autonomous vehicles, as long as I can sort of like remember, autonomy of all sorts, whether that's the ports, whether that's ships, I didn't even know, by the way, like, I'm just a simple guy. Like, I didn't even know hydrogen came in different colors. I always just thought of it as an atom. I don't even understand how it has two places on the periodic table. So, I think I'm really bullish on automation, on autonomy. Before you can automate, you have to be able to decision, right? And so for me, I think what we'll look at, it's not sexy, it's not cool, it's not going to be like on the nightly news, but we're going to see more and more of this move toward that assistance with decisioning. And I think that is that 3 to 4 year horizon where that's going to be ubiquitous within the four walls of many of these places, in a more flexible fashion, right? So, that's going to look things like dynamic routing trees, right? Which we already have some of those, especially some of the largest shippers have dynamic routing trees and dynamic routing decisions, dynamic pricing, all of those things. The assistance with decisioning is the first step there. Then you can, right? Then now that you've been able to decision and been able to decision with a smaller variability, that's where I think, and then that's where you can start to automate. So all of that is really where I see kind of the thing that I'm the most excited about, that I think is going to be the sexiest thing that we really see. I love all the other stuff everyone described, especially buying Dogecoin, but but a lot of that, I think a lot of those are sort of potentially kind of shifting focus, right? Right now, sustainability efforts, corporate responsibility efforts, it's really sexy, it's really cool. But that's because the economy, in my opinion, because the economy is doing well, right? Because money is cheap, we don't have to worry about some of these other problems. If wallets start to get tighter, they're going to care a lot less about what color the hydrogen is and care a lot more about, right, like, how do I just make this cheaper, because I'm not going to invest in it. So that's why I'm looking at these things that are sort of like decoupled and independent, but also de-risking, broadly speaking, people's supply chains, decisions, businesses.
Well, Ryan, I hate to agree with you, but I agree with you. I think that automation
About the Dogecoin thing, yeah. Totally.
I'll get to that in a sec. The automation thing is insidious in a good way. I think it's happening incrementally day by day, and people aren't even really noticing it. So it's like the frog boiling, right?
Yeah,
like,
100%. Yeah,
because it's not as scary as it's being made out to be, because little tiny bits day by day are starting to get automated. So I totally agree with you on that. Super interesting things. I would not have predicted the three things that you guys mentioned. So thanks for coming up with things that we should be pondering over the next few years. If you're interested in Ryan getting an early retirement, by all means, buy a bunch of Dogecoin, apparently.
But
if you want to see him working until
like,
he's 80 years old, sell all your Dogecoin right now.
I'll still be around. I'll still work. I got nothing else to do with my life. I like to say I'm a really nice guy until you get to know me. So, like, it's not like I have friends who are going to hang out with me, right? I mean, they all know me and they've all gone other places. So just buy Dogecoin, because then I'll still be around though.
You have a whole bunch of new friends after today. So
yeah, thanks.
So listen, we're past our time. Ryan, Kai, Kurnar, and Shailesh, thank you so much for the time and really fun conversation. Thanks to Brian and Priyanka at the Supply Chain Meetup. This is fun as always. These are always the best events. So I appreciate it, Brian. You built an awesome community here.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks.
So on that note, we'll call things to a close. Priyanka had to head out. Like Eric said, thanks to the speakers. The advice about Dogecoin is advice you should the advice about Dogecoin is advice you should follow at your own risk. And we've not yet decided what we'll do next month. I'm thinking maybe it will be something to do with blockchain and cryptocurrencies and supply chain. But I'll send some information around once we do. And I know Krenar has to get ready for a meeting in 10 minutes or so. And so on that note, once again, thank you to everyone. Stay safe, and I'll see you around.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Thanks for having me,
Thanks,
everybody.
Bye,
Thanks
bye,
for joining.
guys.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Ryan.
Thank you so
Bye,
much.
Shailesh. Bye, Brian.
Bye.
Bye.
y'all.
Bye, guys. Take care.